I woke up with the taste of metal on my tongue and the sharp sting of fluorescent lights burning through my eyelids. My head throbbed, and for a moment, I had no idea where I was or how I'd gotten there. The smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils, and the distant beeping of machines confirmed it. I was in a hospital. The last thing I remembered was driving home late from work, exhausted but eager to surprise Jessica. I had picked up her favorite pasta from that little Italian place downtown. I'd even gotten flowers, a spontaneous gesture, something we hadn't done for each other in years. I wanted to remind her of us, the version of us that didn't feel so heavy. But I never made it home. When I blinked fully awake, my body felt like lead. A nurse stood at my bedside, her expression too carefully neutral to be comforting. Before I could say anything, she leaned in. "You're in the ICU," she said softly. "You were in an accident." An accident. The words swirled in my foggy brain, pulling up flashes of memory. A pair of headlights veering into my lane, a jarring impact, and then nothing. The nurse asked me questions, routine ones, my name, my birthday. I answered in a daze, trying to make sense of it all. But then she said something that froze me mid-breath. "Your wife has been here," she said, checking my phone. "She stepped out with another gentleman, but they should be back soon." Another gentleman? The nurse must have noticed the confusion on my face because she quickly added, "I believe he's a close friend. He said he helped bring you in after the accident." Helped bring me in? My chest tightened, not from the physical pain but from something worse. Something that felt like betrayal before I could even fully process why. I didn't know anyone who would call themselves a close friend of Jessica's. At least not close enough to be here in my place, standing by her side while I lay broken in a hospital bed. Moments later, the door opened, and there she was, Jessica, looking perfect as ever in a crisp blazer and high heels that clicked sharply against the tiled floor. Her face lit up when she saw me awake, but the relief in her eyes felt forced. Behind her trailed a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that demanded attention. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his smile was just a little too casual for the gravity of the situation. "Oh my God! You're awake!" Jessica exclaimed, rushing to my side. She grabbed my hand, her grip firm but unfamiliar, like she was trying too hard to convey emotion. I was so worried. Before I could respond, she gestured to the man behind her. "This is Eric," she said, her voice a touch too bright. He saw the accident and helped get you to the hospital." Eric stepped forward, offering a nod and a tight smile. "Glad to see you're okay, man. It was bad out there." I stared at him, my brain working overtime to fit the pieces together. "You saw the accident?" I asked, my voice hoarse. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Yeah," Eric said smoothly, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Right place, right time. Lucky I was there." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. There was no warmth, no genuine concern in his tone. And Jessica's body language, standing just a little too close to him, her arm brushing his as she fidgeted nervously, was all wrong. My instincts screamed at me that there was more to the story, but I was too weak to push yet. "Thank you," I muttered, my eyes narrowing as I studied his face. He didn't look like someone who had just stumbled upon a random accident. He looked invested. Jessica quickly jumped in, her voice a little too loud. "Eric was amazing. He stayed with you until the ambulance arrived and even followed us here. You should really thank him." I didn't reply. I was too busy watching how her hand lingered on his arm for just a second too long. Something inside me cracked, a fissure spreading through the fragile foundation of trust one had spent years building with her. I had no proof, not yet, but my gut told me that this wasn't the first time Eric had been in my wife's life, and it sure as hell wasn't by chance. My pulse quickened, and not just from the pain in my chest. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. This accident felt less like a random misfortune and more like the opening act of something much darker. Eric didn't linger long. He made some excuse about needing to check in at work and left with a pat on Jessica's shoulder that made my blood boil. I watched her closely as he disappeared through the door, her eyes following him for just a fraction of a second too long. She turned back to me, her face slipping into an expression that I could only describe as rehearsed concern. "How are you feeling, babe?" she asked, smoothing imaginary wrinkles on the hospital blanket. I ignored the question. "How do you know him?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm building inside me. Jessica's eyes widened, just slightly. "Who, Eric? I told you, he was at the accident." She let out a nervous laugh. "He practically saved your life." "What's with the interrogation?" "Saved my life, huh?" I pressed, keeping my gaze locked on hers. "So he was just, what? Passing by?" Her reaction was instantaneous, a flash of defensiveness. "Yes. What are you trying to say, Liam? That I somehow planned for you to end up in the ICU? God, do you even hear yourself right now?" She folded her arms, her lips tightening into a thin line. Classic Jessica. Whenever she felt cornered, her go-to move was to flip the script, to make me feel like the unreasonable one. I didn't take the bait this time. "I didn't say that," I replied calmly, though my fists clenched beneath the sheets. "But it's funny, isn't it? How Eric knew to bring you here. Did he have your number? Did he know your name?" For a split second, her mask slipped. Her face faltered, just enough to reveal something. Fear? Guilt? Maybe both. "The paramedics must have told him," she said quickly, too quickly. "Why are you being so weird about this? The man did a good thing, and you're acting like what?" I cut her off, my voice rising. "Like something doesn't add up? Because it doesn't, Jessica. None of this makes sense." Her nostrils flared, and she threw her hands in the air. "You know what? Fine. Believe whatever insane conspiracy theory you want. I'm trying to take care of you, and this is the thanks I get." She stormed out of the room, her heels echoing sharply down the corridor. I watched her go, my chest heaving. Not from the physical exertion but from the realization that she wasn't just lying. She was hiding something, and she was bad at it. Alone in the sterile silence of the ICU, I turned over the facts in my mind. Eric's presence wasn't a coincidence. The way Jessica defended him, the way she avoided my questions, it all screamed wrong. And then there was the accident itself. It had been so sudden, so violent, but as I replayed it in my head, a chilling thought crept in. What if it wasn't an accident? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the idea. It was too far-fetched, too ridiculous. But the seed had been planted, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it loose. The nurse came in an hour later to check my vitals. She was kind, chatty even, but I wasn't in the mood for small talk. I kept my responses curt until she mentioned something that made my stomach drop. "Your wife and her friend were very attentive," she said casually, adjusting the foreline. "He was the one who insisted on staying with you in the ambulance. Said he didn't want her to be alone." The words hit me like a freight train. In the ambulance, Eric had ridden with me? That meant he had been there before Jessica. He hadn't just helped bring me to the hospital. He'd been at the scene, involved from the start. But how? And why? I waited until the nurse left before grabbing my phone from the bedside table. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, scrolling through messages and call logs, looking for any clue that could connect the dots. And that's when I saw it. An unsent draft of a text, something I must have started typing before the accident but hadn't sent. "I saw your texts. Who the hell is he?" The message was addressed to Jessica. My blood ran cold. I didn't remember writing it, but there it was, staring back at me like a ghost. Whatever I had discovered before the crash, it was enough to make me confront her. Enough to make her lie to my face. And now, with my memory hazy and my body battered, I was at a disadvantage. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was bigger, darker. I wasn't sure yet how deep the betrayal ran, but I swore to myself that I'd find out. No matter what it took. The hours crawled by in the ICU, each second thick with the weight of unanswered questions. Jessica didn't come back. A nurse muttered something about her, stepping out for some air. But I knew better. She wasn't the type to let a little fresh air clear her head. Jessica avoided situations when the lies stacked too high. The hospital room felt suffocating, but my mind was sharper now, clearer than it had been since waking up. That unsent text haunted me. Who the hell is he? I had known about Eric before the accident. But how? What had I seen? My brain was a maze, and the exit was buried in the memory of that night. I closed my eyes and forced myself to go back, step by step. The flowers, the pasta, the drive home. It had been late, around 9 p.m. My office had been a madhouse, and I left later than usual. As I replayed the scene, a fragment of something sharp and vivid broke through the fog. Jessica's car. It had been parked outside a place it didn't belong, the Silvercrest Hotel. The realization hit me like another collision. I hadn't forgotten the detail. My brain had buried it under the trauma. I'd driven past the hotel, and there it was, her unmistakable red coupe in the parking lot. At first, I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe a work meeting. Maybe she was meeting Amanda. But something about the hotel, a business-class place where no one went for dinner, set my nerves on edge. I remembered pulling into the lot, heart pounding, trying to talk myself down as I climbed out of the car. But then I saw them. Jessica, in her signature beige coat, walking toward the side exit with a man. Not just any man, Eric. He had his hand on the small of her back, guiding her like she belonged to him. They were close, too close. She laughed at something he said, the kind of laugh she hadn't shared with me in months. That's when it clicked. I'd started typing the text. I saw your texts. Who the hell is he? But then I dropped my phone in my rush to follow them. I couldn't let them leave, not without answers. The next part was blurry. I remembered the adrenaline, the rush of blood in my ears as I followed their car. They didn't take the main roads. They weaved through side streets like they knew someone might be watching. It wasn't just an affair. There was something calculated about the way they moved, like they were hiding more than a fling. And then, the crash. My heart sank. The headlights from another car, Eric's SUV veering into my lane. It wasn't an accident. He'd seen me following them, hadn't he? He knew I was close, that I was piecing it together. The bastard had run me off the road. I felt a wave of nausea and rage that made the room spin. I had almost died because of them, because of her. And now, she had the audacity to sit by my bed and lie to my face about who Eric was, about why he was even there. I had to move carefully. I was still in the hospital, still weak. They thought I was clueless, that I didn't remember. But now I had pieces of the truth, enough to start playing the game on my terms. Before I could think of my next step, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. A message. From Jessica. Sorry for storming out earlier. Eric says he'll be back to check on you. He's been such a help through all of this. I'm grabbing a coffee and we'll be back soon. The gall of her. Eric says he'll be back? What the hell did Eric have to do with anything? Why was he hovering over my wife, making decisions about my recovery? My teeth clenched, and my fingers gripped the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I wanted to call her, scream at her, demand answers, but I stopped myself. That's what she expected. That's what they both expected. Jessica and Eric thought they had the upper hand, that they could control the narrative while I lay here helpless. I needed to be smarter. I needed to wait. Let them hang themselves with their lies. The nurse came in again, asking if I needed anything, and I seized the opportunity. Do you have my discharge papers yet? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She frowned, looking at the chart. You're stable, but the doctor wanted to monitor you another night. Are you in a hurry to leave? I just need to get home, I said quickly. I'll rest better there. She hesitated but promised to check with the attending physician. As she left the room, I stared at my phone, my mind spinning with plans. If Jessica thought she could manipulate me, if Eric thought he could bury me under his smooth lies, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to end whatever they were hiding, once and for all. Jessica returned before the nurse had time to come back with an update. She walked in holding a coffee cup and wearing an expression of forced calm. The door clicked shut behind her, and for a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of the machines keeping track of my fragile state. She sat in the chair by my bed, her eyes scanning me carefully. It was like she was searching for signs of what I might remember. The silence stretched uncomfortably until I decided to break it. You've been out a while, I said, my voice low but steady. Where'd you go? She perked up, clearly relieved at the mundane question. Oh, just needed some air. And caffeine. She held up the coffee cup like it was proof of her alibi. I nodded, letting the quiet settle between us again. I wasn't going to let her steer the conversation. She'd slipped once in the parking lot of that hotel, and she'd slip again. I just needed to wait. "So, Eric," I said casually, watching her reaction. Her grip on the coffee cup tightened, just slightly. "Funny how he's been so involved in this. Do you two work together or something?" Jessica laughed, but it came out too sharp, too fast. "No, of course not. I told you he was just there when the accident happened. Honestly, you should be thanking him. If he hadn't been there, who knows what could have happened. Right?" I said, nodding slowly. "But isn't it strange? I mean, he's not a paramedic or a cop, and yet he's always around." Her eyes narrowed, and she shifted uncomfortably. "What are you trying to say, Liam?" I shrugged. "Just that it seems like you know him pretty well. For a guy who was just passing by, he sure seems close to you." Her face hardened, and for a moment I thought she might snap. Instead, she leaned back in the chair, crossing her legs like she was trying to regain control of the situation. "I don't know what you're insinuating," she said evenly. "But you've been through a trauma. Maybe you're overthinking things." "Maybe." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Or maybe I'm remembering things." Her composure faltered, just for a second. "Remembering?" she echoed, her voice slightly strained. "Yeah," I said, watching her intently. "Like the hotel. The Silver Crest. You know, the one where your car was parked the night of the accident." Her face drained of color, and she opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She was caught, and we both knew it. "You want to explain that?" I asked, my tone cold now. "Or should I just keep guessing?" Jessica blinked rapidly, scrambling for an answer. I was meeting Amanda," she stammered. "We had drinks after work. It's not what you think." "Oh, Amanda." I tilted my head. "Funny. Because I saw you walking out with Eric." Her mouth snapped shut. The lie had been so quick, so instinctive, but now it hung in the air between us like a noose tightening around her neck. I leaned forward, the pain in my chest flaring as I forced myself upright. "Do you want to try again, Jess? Or are you going to tell me the truth for once?" Her eyes darted to the door like she was weighing her chances of escape. When she realized there was no easy way out, she let out an exasperated sigh. "Okay, fine. Yes, I met Eric there. But it wasn't what you think." "Oh, really?" I said, my voice rising. "Because what I think is that you've been sneaking around behind my back. I think you've been lying to me for months." She jumped to her feet, her coffee forgotten on the side table. "It's not like that, Liam. He's a colleague. We were meeting to discuss a project. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd overreact. And guess what? I was right. A project." I barked out a laugh, the sound bitter and hollow. "At a hotel? At night? Do you even hear yourself?" Jessica's face twisted with anger. "Oh, give me a break. You've always been paranoid. Always looking for something to blame me for. Maybe if you weren't so busy working late and ignoring me, I wouldn't have to." She stopped herself, her words hanging in the air like a loaded gun. "Wouldn't have to what, Jessica?" I demanded, my voice a dangerous edge. She clamped her mouth shut, her eyes blazing with defiance. But it was too late. Her slip had already given me all the confirmation I needed. "Yeah," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "That's what I thought." She didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her bag and stormed toward the door. "I'm not doing this with you right now," she snapped. "You need rest. Not another one of your paranoid meltdowns." The door slammed behind her, and I was left alone again, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and vindication. She thought she could walk away, that she could spin this story into something I'd swallow like I always had. But this time was different. She had underestimated me. The moment the door slammed behind Jessica, the silence in the room felt deafening. My body was buzzing, not just from the confrontation but from the confirmation that I was finally pulling at the right threads. She'd cracked. She hadn't denied it outright. She had deflected, turned the blame on me, like a snake cornered and desperate to strike. But that slip, that single moment of anger where her words almost spilled out, was all I needed. Something deeper than infidelity was brewing here, and I was going to dig it out. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling. Not from weakness, but from adrenaline. I didn't know exactly where to start, but instinct told me to go back to the root of it all. Eric. Who was he really? And what was his connection to Jessica? The hospital's Wi-Fi was slow, but it didn't matter. A quick search brought up a few dozen LinkedIn profiles and vague references to Eric Morgan. None of them stood out, but then I remembered the nurse's comment earlier. Eric had stayed in the ambulance with me. He'd been listed as part of the incident report. I called the hospital's reception desk, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rage simmering under my skin. "Hi, this is Liam Carter," I said. "The guy in room 309. I was in an accident recently, and I need to confirm some details for my insurance. Can you connect me to whoever handles patient transport records?" The receptionist hesitated but finally transferred me to someone in administration. I repeated the story, careful to sound calm and professional, as if this wasn't about unraveling the truth but simply checking a box. After a few minutes of waiting, the voice on the other end returned. "We have the report here. Your emergency contact, Jessica Carter, was notified at the scene, and the man who stayed with you during transport was Eric Morgan." My grip tightened on the phone. "Does it say how he came to be at the scene?" "Looks like he told the paramedics he was a witness. First on the scene, actually. First on the scene." The words sent a chill down my spine. Eric hadn't just happened upon the crash. He'd been there immediately, like he'd been following me, or worse, like he'd known it was going to happen. "Thanks," I said, forcing a tight smile into my voice before hanging up. I leaned back into the stiff hospital bed, my mind racing. The idea was too absurd, too sinister to fully believe, but I couldn't shake it. What if the crash wasn't an accident? What if Eric had been there to make sure I didn't follow them any further? Or worse, to silence me completely? My phone buzzed in my hand, breaking my train of thought. It was a message from Jessica. "Sorry about earlier. Let's talk when you're feeling better. Don't stress yourself out. Love you." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. She thought she could patch this up with a few empty words and a little time? Did she think I'd forget the way her voice cracked when she tried to explain the hotel? The venom in her tone when she blamed me? No, this wasn't something I'd let go. I decided to take a risk. Instead of responding, I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't thought about in years. Brandon. Brandon had been my best friend in college, the guy who'd taught me how to stand up for myself, how to think 2 steps ahead. We drifted apart over the years. He moved out west for work, and I stayed here to build a life with Jessica. But Brandon had one quality I needed now more than ever. He had an uncanny knack for sniffing out lies and finding the truth buried under layers of deception. I hit call and prayed he'd pick up. "Liam." His voice was groggy, like I'd woken him up. "Brandon, it's been a while." "Yeah, no kidding. You all right? You sound off." "I need your help," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. "I think something's going on with Jessica. Something big. I don't have all the pieces yet, but I don't think my car accident was an accident." There was a long pause. "Jesus," he finally said. "Okay, slow down. What the hell's going on?" I gave him the short version, the hotel, Eric, the crash, the way Jessica had been acting. He listened without interrupting, his breathing steady on the other end. "All right," he said when I finished. "You're not crazy, Liam. If even half of what you're saying is true, something's definitely going on. You need to get out of that hospital and get ahead of this before they can pull anything else." "I already asked about discharge papers," I said. "I'll be out of here tomorrow at the latest." "Good. Until then, lay low. Don't let her know you're onto her. And Liam? Yeah. Send me everything you've got on this Eric guy. I'll see what I can dig up." I hung up feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in days. Brandon was relentless when it came to digging up dirt. If there was something to find, he'd find it. The door opened, and Jessica walked back in, her heels clicking softly against the tile. Her face was composed, a picture of calm and concern, but I saw through it now. "Hey," she said, her voice sugary sweet. "Feeling any better?" I forced a smile. "Much better. Thanks." She sat by the bed again, her eyes scanning me, and I could almost see the gears turning in her head. She thought I was pacified, clueless. But I wasn't her pawn anymore. I was the one watching now, waiting for her next move. And I wasn't going to miss a thing. I stayed quiet as Jessica settled back into the chair next to my hospital bed. She crossed her legs and pulled out her phone, scrolling through her screen like nothing had happened. Her composure was almost admirable. Almost. The room felt suffocating with her in it, the walls seeming to close in. I focused on the steady beep of the heart monitor, using it as a metronome to keep myself calm. I needed to play this smart. I couldn't let her know what I'd uncovered. Not yet. You seem distracted, I said after a long silence. My voice was casual, deliberately light, but her head snapped up like I'd struck a nerve. Distracted? No, just catching up on emails, she said, forcing a small smile. Why? Just wondering, I said, leaning back against the pillows. You've been on edge lately. You stormed out earlier. Is there something you're not telling me? Her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. Oh my God, Liam, are we seriously doing this again? I told you Eric and I have a project. I cut in, my tone sharper now. Yeah, I remember. Convenient, though, that the project just happened to take you to a hotel. And that you just happened to be meeting him the night I ended up in a ditch. Her jaw tightened, and I saw her shoulders stiffen. I don't like what you're implying. Neither do I said, staring her down. So how about you stop dodging my questions and start giving me some real answers? Jessica set her phone down, her fingers gripping the armrests of the chair. You're being paranoid, she snapped. Do you have any idea what it's been like for me these past few days? I've been worried sick about you. And instead of being grateful, you're throwing around accusations like, I saw your emails. I interrupted, my voice cold as ice. The blood drained from her face. She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. For once, she didn't have a quick retort or a deflection ready. What emails? She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The ones between you and Eric, I said, leaning forward. Pain lanced through my ribs, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her squirm out of this. You know, the ones where you talk about me being clueless and making sure I'm distracted. Her hands flew to her mouth, but her reaction wasn't one of guilt. It was anger. You went through my private emails? Are you serious, Liam? That's a violation of trust. I laughed bitterly, the sound raw and harsh. A violation of trust? That's rich, coming from you. She shot up from her chair, her face flushed with fury. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're making this into something it's not. Am I? I snapped. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and Eric have been planning something behind my back for weeks. Months, maybe. So why don't you go ahead and explain that forged power of attorney document while you're at it? Jessica's eyes widened in panic, and for a moment, I thought she might bolt. But then, something in her shifted. The fear in her face melted away, replaced by cold defiance. You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? She said, her voice dripping with venom. You're so good at playing the victim, Liam. Poor, clueless Liam. Always working late, always too busy to notice when his marriage is falling apart. Don't try to turn this around on me, I growled. This isn't about my work hours or our marriage. This is about you lying to me, manipulating me, working with Eric to protect myself, she snapped, cutting me off. Her words hung in the air like a gunshot, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Protect yourself? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. From what? From me. Jessica's jaw clenched, and I saw her hands trembling at her sides. She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes said everything. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. What the hell are you talking about, Jessica? She turned away, her shoulders stiff. You wouldn't understand, she said quietly. You never do. Try me, I said, my voice hard. She hesitated, her back still to me. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold and detached. Eric and we've been working together on something important. Something you don't need to know about. Don't need to know about? I repeated, my voice rising. Are you hearing yourself right now? You're my wife, Jessica. Or at least you're supposed to be. She spun around, her eyes blazing. You want the truth, Liam? Fine. I didn't want to be stuck in this life anymore. I didn't want to spend the next 20 years being your sidekick while you work yourself into an early grave. So yeah, Eric and I made plans. We had to. You weren't listening to me. You never listened. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. So what? You decided to get rid of me? Take my money? My life? Her lips curled into a bitter smile. You're so dramatic. No one was trying to get rid of you. We needed you out of the way. Temporarily. The room spun as her words sank in. Out of the way. Temporarily. My car crash hadn't been an accident. Eric and Jessica had orchestrated it. You tried to kill me? I said, the words hollow and disbelieving. Jessica's face twisted into something cruel. Something I barely recognized. If we'd wanted you dead, Liam, you'd be dead. I stared at her. The woman I'd loved for years, and felt nothing but cold, raw hatred. Whatever had been left of our marriage, of the life we'd built together, was gone. You're going to regret this, I said, my voice steady and deadly calm. Jessica raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. Maybe, she said, but at least I won't regret taking control of my life for once. And with that, she grabbed her bag and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the wreckage of everything I thought I knew. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The moment the door clicked shut behind Jessica, a primal energy surged through me, drowning out the pain in my chest and the fatigue gripping my body. Her words echoed in my head, each one sharpening my focus. We just needed you out of the way, temporarily. This wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was war. I reached for my phone and dialed Brandon's number. He picked up on the second ring. Liam? You good? I need you to find everything you can on Eric Morgan, I said, my voice low but steady. Jessica just admitted they were behind the crash. I don't have all the details yet, but they were planning to take me out. Financially, legally, maybe even permanently. Brandon cursed under his breath. All right, I'm on it. Any specific leads? There's a power of attorney document. A fake one, naming Jessica as the sole decision-maker for everything if I'm incapacitated. Start there, and dig into Eric work, family, finances, everything. Consider it done. You still planning to leave the hospital today? I'm getting out as soon as I can, I said. Keep me updated. I hung up, my hands trembling. Not with fear, but with the sheer adrenaline of knowing I was finally taking back control. Jessica thought she'd won, thought she'd walked out of this room the victor, but she had no idea what was coming. Discharge took longer than I wanted. The nurse insisted on going over every instruction with painstaking detail, but my mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments of Jessica's lies. By the time I finally stepped out of the hospital, the sun was dipping low on the horizon. I called for a ride home, my ribs protesting every step as I climbed into the car. The driver didn't make small talk, and I was grateful. I needed the silence to plan my next moves. When I arrived home, the house was dark and quiet. Jessica wasn't there, but her coat and shoes were gone, so I knew she wouldn't be back anytime soon. Good. I locked the door behind me and headed straight to her office. Jessica was meticulous about keeping her space organized, almost too meticulous. Her desk was spotless, her files neatly stacked, but I wasn't looking for the obvious. I pulled out the drawers one by one, rifling through their contents until I found a folder tucked at the back. Inside were printed copies of emails between her and Eric, some of which I recognized from her laptop. But there were also receipts, hotel stays, high-end dinners, even a rental car that Eric had booked in his name. The dates lined up suspiciously close to nights Jessica had claimed to be working late. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note, scrawled in Jessica's neat cursive. Timeline for transfer. POA to be notarized by Friday. Financial accounts to be merged by the end of the month. Eric to oversee execution. I stared at the note, the rage inside me boiling over. Execution. The word felt deliberate, sinister, like a final nail in the coffin they'd planned for me. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Brandon. I found something, he said without preamble. Eric Morgan's company? It's a consulting firm, but it's not what it looks like on the surface. They specialize in private solutions for high-stakes divorces and business disputes. Basically, they help people screw over their spouses or partners while keeping their hands clean. That explains a lot, I muttered. Wait, it gets worse, Brandon said grimly. Eric's had legal trouble before, Allegations of coercion, fraud, even blackmail. Nothing stuck because his clients always vouched for him. Guess who one of those clients was? I didn't have to guess. Jessica. Bingo, Brandon confirmed. She hired him last year, right around the time you said things started getting off between you two. A cold realization settled over me. Jessica hadn't just stumbled into an affair with Eric. She'd hired him. He was a professional, someone she'd brought in to dismantle my life piece by piece. They've been planning this for over a year, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Looks like it, Brandon said. What's your next move? I took a deep breath, the beginnings of a plan forming in my mind. They think I'm still playing defense, I said, but that's about to change. Over the next few hours, I worked methodically, fueled by a mixture of rage and determination. I copied the documents I'd found in Jessica's office and backed up the emails to a secure drive. Every piece of evidence was another weapon in my arsenal. I also made calls, first to a private investigator, then to my lawyer. Both of them were on board within minutes, their professionalism barely masking their intrigue at the unfolding drama. Do nothing until I say, my lawyer advised. If they think you're onto them, they might try to speed things up. That was fine by me. Let them think they had me cornered. The trap I was setting would snap shut soon enough. By the time Jessica came home, it was nearly midnight. She walked in with an air of indifference, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. You're out of the hospital, she said, her tone flat. How are you feeling? Better? I said evenly, watching her carefully. She lingered by the doorway, her eyes scanning me for signs of weakness. When she didn't find any, she shrugged and headed upstairs without another word. I stayed on the couch, my mind spinning. The game was shifting, and she didn't even realize the ground beneath her feet was about to collapse. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, I was up early, running on caffeine and determination. Jessica was still asleep when I left the house, her perfect mask of indifference slipping while she snored softly in the bed we once shared. I grabbed the file of incriminating documents, my laptop and my phone, all carefully packed into my bag. Today wasn't about sitting idle. Today was about action. I drove to Brandon's rented office space in the city, a nondescript building that screamed, "Nobody important works here." He greeted me with his usual smirk, though there was a flicker of concern in his eyes when he saw the state I was in. "You look like hell," he said, motioning me to sit. "Feel worse," I muttered. "But I'm not here to rest." Brandon wasted no time. He spread out the information he'd gathered, Eric's background, Jessica's digital footprint, and a few choice tidbits he'd uncovered about their recent activities. Eric's been funneling cash into an offshore account, Brandon explained, pointing to a printout of bank transfers. Looks like Jessica's been making deposits, too. Smaller amounts to keep it under the radar, but it adds up. They're stashing money for the next step, I said grimly. Exactly, Brandon confirmed. Once they've bled you dry, they'll take off. Together or not, doesn't matter. You'll be left with nothing. I clenched my jaw, feeling the weight of their betrayal settle deeper into my chest. But it wasn't just anger anymore, it was clarity. They thought they'd planned for everything, but they hadn't planned for me fighting back. Over the next several hours, Brandon and I laid the groundwork for what would be the first stage of my counterattack. It started with my lawyer. I sent him copies of every email, every document, and every bank transaction Brandon had uncovered. "We're filing a restraining order," my lawyer said after reviewing the material. "You'll also want to freeze any joint accounts immediately. Once we have the court's approval, we can take steps to nullify the forged power of attorney." "Make it happen," I said. By midday, I was at the bank, cutting off Jessica's access to our accounts. Watching the teller's polite but impassive expression as they deactivated her access was oddly satisfying. It was one less tool she could use against me. That afternoon, I set the real trap. With Brandon's help, I drafted an email to Jessica, one that looked like a legitimate communication from my lawyer. It was carefully worded, just vague enough to suggest I'd discovered a financial discrepancy, but not so explicit as to reveal what I truly knew. The email was bait, designed to provoke her into action. Subject: urgent. Discrepancy found in financial records. From Liam's lawyer, spoofed for anonymity. To Jessica Taylor. Jessica. We have identified an irregularity in the joint accounts belonging to Liam and yourself. Given the sensitive nature of this matter, it's critical that we speak with you directly to clarify your involvement. Please respond at your earliest convenience. I didn't send it immediately. Instead, I waited until I was sure she'd be distracted around 6 p.m., when she was usually scrolling through Instagram or half-watching TV with a glass of wine. When I finally hit send, my phone buzzed almost instantly. Brandon had set up a trace on her devices, and within minutes, he confirmed she'd opened the email on her laptop. She took the bait, Brandon said, grinning. What's her next move? I asked. Probably panic, he replied. But if she's smart, she'll call Eric. He'll be her first line of defense. And lucky for us, that's exactly what we want. Sure enough, Jessica's behavior shifted almost immediately. I returned home that evening to find her pacing the living room, her phone pressed to her ear. I don't know how they found out, she hissed, not noticing me standing quietly in the doorway. Yes, of course, I deleted everything. No, Eric, I'm not coming over right now. It'll look suspicious. She paused, listening intently. Her voice lowered, but I caught the words, just stick to the plan. Before she hung up, Jessica turned and froze when she saw me. Liam, she said, her voice tightening with false sweetness. I didn't hear you come in. Busy day? I asked, my tone casual. She shrugged, forcing a smile. Just the usual. How was yours? I studied her carefully, watching the way her hands fidgeted, the tension in her jaw. She was unraveling, and she didn't even realize it yet. Productive, I said, matching her fake tone. You seemed busy on the phone just now. Who were you talking to? Her face hardened, but she recovered quickly. Amanda, she lied. She's going through something with her boyfriend. Drama, you know how it is. Right? I said, my smile not reaching my eyes. I know exactly how it is. Jessica stiffened, her eyes darting toward the kitchen. I'm going to grab some wine, she said quickly. Want a glass? No, thanks, I said, my voice flat. I waited until she disappeared into the kitchen before pulling out my phone. Brandon's text flashed on the screen. Call intercepted. Eric is panicking. Wants her to meet him tomorrow. Sending details now. Tomorrow. That was when it would all come crashing down. Jessica and Eric had underestimated me for the last time. And tomorrow, when she thought she was meeting him in secret, I'd be there to greet them both, with everything I'd prepared. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was justice. The next morning was eerily calm, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Jessica had already left by the time I got up, which wasn't a surprise. She always left early when she had something to hide. Brandon had sent me the details of her meeting with Eric, a discreet cafe tucked into a corner of the city, one of those places where people went when they didn't want to be seen. She didn't know I was following her. I stayed far back, my rented sedan blending into the morning traffic as I watched her car weave through the streets. My ribs still ached, and every turn sent a sharp reminder of the crash they'd caused. But I gritted my teeth and kept driving. This wasn't just about catching them, it was about ending this once and for all. The cafe was smaller than I expected, with a cozy outdoor patio shielded by tall hedges. Jessica parked in the lot, and I watched as she stepped out of her car, her coat pristine, her hair perfectly styled. She looked like she was heading into a business meeting, not a clandestine rendezvous with her co-conspirator. I gave her a few minutes to settle in before stepping out of my car. The adrenaline coursing through my veins dulled the pain in my body as I adjusted the hidden camera Brandon had helped me set up in my jacket. This wasn't going to be a confrontation, it was going to be a performance. Eric was already waiting when Jessica arrived. They sat at a corner table, their heads bent close together, their voices too low for anyone nearby to overhear. I slipped into the cafe unnoticed, ordering a coffee and taking a seat a few tables away. From my vantage point, I could see everything. The tension in Jessica's posture, the way Eric's eyes darted around the room like he was expecting someone to walk in at any moment. They were nervous. Good. I activated the camera and pulled out my phone, pretending to scroll as I listened to their conversation. The microphone on the camera was strong enough to pick up their voices, and I strained to catch every word. I told you it was too risky, Jessica hissed, her voice sharp but quiet. Now there's a lawyer involved. He's freezing the accounts. Eric leaned back, his expression tight. It's only a problem if you panic. He doesn't have proof, at least not enough to do anything yet. We stick to the timeline. Jessica's laugh was bitter. Stick to the timeline? He's already onto us, Eric. What happens when he digs deeper? Eric's face darkened. Then we escalate. You knew this wouldn't be easy, Jess. If he gets too close, we make sure he doesn't have the chance to fight back. My stomach turned, but I kept my face neutral, my hands steady as I sipped my coffee. Escalate. They weren't just planning to ruin me, they were ready to eliminate me if it came to that. Jessica leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. And what happens after? If Liam survives this? Eric cut her off, his tone cold. He won't. The words sent a chill down my spine. They were done with caution, done with subtlety. If their current plan failed, they were prepared to go further, to make sure I didn't walk away. I'd heard enough. I stood, taking my coffee with me, and walked straight to their table. Jessica looked up first, her eyes widening in shock as I loomed over them. Liam? She stammered. What are you? Good morning, I said, my tone icy. I set my coffee cup down on their table and smiled. Nice place for a business meeting. Eric's face twisted into something between irritation and alarm. You're supposed to be resting, he said, trying to sound casual. I'm sure I am, I replied, pulling out my phone. But I figured I'd stop by and say hello. You know, since you've both been so concerned about me lately. Jessica's hands shook slightly as she reached for her coffee. Liam, you're overreacting, she said, her voice trembling. This isn't what it looks like. Oh, it's exactly what it looks like, I said, leaning in closer. In fact, I've got it all recorded. Every single word. Her face went pale and Eric shot her a warning look. You don't know what you're talking about, Eric said, his voice low and threatening. Really? I said, tilting my head. Because I just heard you say that if I get too close, you'll make sure I don't have the chance to fight back. Sounds pretty clear to me. Jessica stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. Liam, this is insane. You need help. This paranoia is... Paranoia? I interrupted, my voice sharp. Is that what you call this? I pulled out the printed emails and bank statements, slapping them onto the table. These look pretty real to me. Or are they just figments of my imagination? Eric's mask of calm cracked, his jaw tightening as he glanced at the papers. You shouldn't have done this, he said quietly, his voice laced with menace. Oh, I'm just getting started. I shot back. The cafe had gone silent, other patrons glancing our way with curious eyes. Jessica looked around nervously, her face flushed with embarrassment and panic. Liam, she hissed. This isn't the place. No, I said, cutting her off. This is exactly the place. Because I want people to see what you both really are. Liars. Manipulators. Cowards. Eric stood, towering over me, his face a mask of barely contained rage. You don't know who you're messing with. I smirked. Neither do you. And with that, I walked out, leaving them with the wreckage of their carefully laid plans, and the knowledge that this fight was far from over. Walking out of the cafe was like stepping out of a pressure cooker, the weight of Jessica's lies and Eric's threats finally lifting. But the fight wasn't over. If anything, the battle was just beginning. Brandon was waiting in the parking lot, leaning casually against his car, a small smirk playing on his lips as I approached. Well? He asked. They took the bait, I said, opening the passenger door. Jessica panicked, and Eric practically threatened me in front of half the cafe. It's all on tape. Brandon let out a low whistle. They're reckless. That'll work in our favor. I climbed into the car, wincing as my ribs protested. Brandon slid into the driver's seat and pulled out of the lot, his expression serious now. You ready to move to the next step? I nodded. Let's make them regret every second of this. Back at Brandon's office, we pieced together the final part of the plan. Everything was falling into place. The forged power of attorney, the offshore accounts, the recording of their conversation at the cafe. The evidence was damning, but we needed one last move to seal their fate. The accounts, Brandon said, pointing to the transaction records. We've got enough to make them sweat. But if we can tie Jessica to Eric's fraud network, we'll bury them both. How? I asked, leaning forward. Brandon grinned. By making them think they're still in control. That evening, I returned home to find Jessica already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. She looked up as I entered, her expression carefully neutral, but I could see the cracks. Her eyes darted to my face, searching for clues about how much I knew. Long day? She asked, her tone light but forced. You could say that, I replied, setting my bag down by the door. She sipped her wine, her hand steady. I was thinking we should talk. About us. Everything's been so tense lately. I raised an eyebrow, barely suppressing a bitter laugh. Tense? That's one way to put it. Jessica leaned forward, setting her glass on the table. Liam, I don't want to fight. I just want to move past this. Can we do that? Her words were carefully chosen, but her eyes betrayed her. She was fishing, testing the waters to see if I'd swallowed her lies or if I was about to blow her world apart. Maybe, I said, my tone measured, but I need something from you first. Her shoulders stiffened. What do you mean? Eric, I said bluntly. I want you to cut ties with him. Completely. Jessica blinked, clearly caught off guard. What? Liam, I hardly even know him. Don't lie to me. I interrupted, my voice sharp. I know exactly what he is to you. If you want to fix this, if you want any chance of saving what's left of us, you'll drop him. Now. Jessica's mouth opened and closed, her carefully crafted facade slipping as she scrambled for a response. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she said quietly. I'll tell him it's over. I didn't believe her for a second, but that wasn't the point. I needed her to think I was still on the hook, still desperate enough to buy into her act. The next day, Brandon and I put the final stage of the plan into motion. Using the transaction records and communication logs we'd uncovered, Brandon set up a fake opportunity for Eric, an investment account tied to the offshore accounts he'd been using to stash stolen money. It's risky, Brandon said as we finalized the details. If Eric's as paranoid as he seems, he might not take the bait. He will, I said. He's too greedy not to. Sure enough, within hours of receiving the fake proposal, Eric moved a significant sum into the account, unaware that it was a trap. The moment the money landed, Brandon's contact at the bank flagged the transaction and forwarded it to the authorities. We didn't have to wait long. By evening, Eric's accounts were frozen, and investigators were circling like vultures. I was sitting on the couch when Jessica came home that night, her face pale and drawn. She didn't say anything as she set her purse down, her movements stiff and mechanical. Rough day? I asked, not bothering to hide the amusement in my voice. Jessica glared at me, her composure cracking. What did you do? I leaned back, crossing my arms. What do you mean? Don't play dumb, she snapped. Eric called me. He said his accounts have been frozen, that someone's been digging into his finances. He thinks it's you. I shrugged. Maybe it is. Or maybe he just made too many enemies. Hard to say. Her eyes blazed with fury, but there was something else there, too, fear. For the first time, she realized she wasn't in control anymore. You're going to regret this, she hissed. I stood, stepping closer until I was towering over her. No, Jessica, I said, my voice cold and steady. The only thing I regret is not seeing through you sooner. But don't worry, you'll regret everything soon enough. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say a word, my phone buzzed. It was Brandon. It's done, he said simply. I hung up and smiled at Jessica, the weight of her betrayal finally lifting from my shoulders. The trap had closed, and there was no way out for her or Eric now. Jessica stood frozen, her eyes locked on me as if she were trying to decipher what I meant. The moment stretched out, her mask of composure cracking under the weight of the unknown. She wasn't used to being outmaneuvered, not by me, not by anyone. You're bluffing? She said finally, but her voice wavered, betraying the confidence she was trying to project. I leaned against the doorframe, letting her stew in the silence. Am I? I asked, my tone calm but laced with challenge. Why don't you ask Eric? Oh wait, you can't. He's probably too busy explaining his frozen accounts to the authorities. Her lips parted in shock, but she quickly recovered, shaking her head. You're insane, she spat. You think you can just… What? Ruin everything? For what? Because you can't let go of your pathetic insecurities. I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. This isn't about my insecurities, Jessica. This is about you and Eric scheming to destroy me. And guess what? You failed. Her face twisted into a mask of rage. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined everything. That's funny, I said with a smirk. That's exactly what I was going to say to you. Jessica grabbed her phone from the counter, her fingers flying across the screen. I could see her desperation, the frantic need to regain control. She was calling Eric. I knew it before she even put the phone to her ear, but the call didn't connect. Her expression shifted from anger to confusion as she stared at the screen. She tried again and again before finally letting out a frustrated growl. What's wrong, Jess? I asked, feigning concern. Eric not picking up? Her eyes snapped to mine, blazing with fury. What did you do? I let out a short laugh. What did I do? I think the better question is, what did you do? You hired a fraudster to take me down, faked legal documents, siphoned money out of our accounts, and for what? To shack up with Eric and live off my savings. Jessica didn't deny it. Instead, she took a step toward me, her voice low and venomous. You don't understand. You never understood. I was suffocating in this marriage, in this life you forced me into. Eric gave me a way out. A way out, I repeated, my voice rising. So you tried to kill me? To erase me? You didn't want a way out, Jessica. You wanted a shortcut. She flinched, but the defiance in her eyes didn't waver. You were never going to give me what I wanted, she said bitterly. I had no choice. No choice, I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. You had every choice. You could have walked away, Jessica. You could have told me the truth. Instead, you turned into this monster. Her face twisted into a sneer. And what about you, Liam? Always working late, always putting everything else before me. Did you ever stop to think that maybe I deserved more than being a footnote in your life? I felt a flicker of guilt, but it was quickly snuffed out by the mountain of evidence against her. Whatever failings I'd had in our marriage, they didn't justify what she and Eric had done. You're unbelievable, I said quietly. You actually think you're the victim here. Jessica didn't respond, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Her eyes darted toward the door like she was calculating an escape route. But before she could make a move, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and smiled. It's for you, I said, holding the phone out toward her. Her brow furrowed in confusion, but when she saw the name on the screen, Detective Harris, the color drained from her face. Jessica Taylor, I said, my voice steady. Meet the consequences of your actions. She didn't take the phone. Instead, she backed away, her hands trembling. You wouldn't, she whispered. Wouldn't what? I asked, taking a step closer. Wouldn't hand over everything I found? The emails, the forged documents, the bank transfers? Oh, Jessica, I already did. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the nearest chair, staring at me in disbelief. You're lying, she said, but the words came out weak, hollow. I turned the phone toward her, letting her see the call in progress. The detective's voice echoed faintly through the receiver. Mr. Taylor, we're ready to move forward. Is Miss Taylor at the residence? Jessica's face crumpled as the weight of the situation finally hit her. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with desperation. Liam, please, she whispered. We can fix this. We can. No, I said firmly. You made your choice, Jessica, and now you're going to face the consequences. Her mouth opened to plead again, but before she could say another word, the sound of sirens pierced the air, growing louder as they approached the house. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but I felt no pity, no remorse. This was justice. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. The nightmare was over, or at least it would be as soon as they took her away. The sirens stopped abruptly outside the house, their sharp wail replaced by the crunch of boots on gravel. Jessica's head jerked toward the door as though she could will it to stay closed, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. "Liam," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't do this. Please." Her tears were flowing freely now, streaking the carefully crafted mask she always wore. But I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. Just the cold satisfaction of knowing the truth was finally catching up to her. "You did this to yourself?" I said flatly, my voice devoid of emotion. The knock at the door was firm, decisive. Jessica flinched as though the sound had struck her, and I saw her body tense as if she were about to run. "You should probably answer that," I said, motioning toward the door. Her eyes snapped back to mine, wide and frantic. "Liam, please," she begged. "This doesn't have to go this far. We can fix it. I'll make it right. I'll tell Eric to leave, I'll undo everything. Just don't let them take me." "You had every chance to fix it, Jessica," I replied, my voice steely. "You didn't care about making it right when you were siphoning money out of our accounts. You didn't care when you faked legal documents. And you sure as hell didn't care when you and Eric planned that crash." Her face twisted in despair, but before she could respond, the knock came again, louder this time. "Jessica Taylor, this is the police. Open the door." Her body sagged as if the weight of those words had finally crushed her. With trembling hands, she stood and shuffled toward the door, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The door swung open, revealing two uniformed officers flanking Detective Harris, a man in his 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor and a sharp, calculating gaze. His eyes flicked to Jessica, then to me, as though sizing up the situation in an instant. "Ms. Taylor," Harris said, his tone calm but authoritative. "We have a warrant for your arrest. Please step outside." Jessica turned back to me one last time, her expression a mix of disbelief and desperation. "Liam," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. I didn't have a choice." "Neither did I said quietly. The officers moved in, their presence unyielding as they guided Jessica out of the house. She didn't resist, but I could hear her sobbing softly as they led her to the waiting squad car. Harris stayed behind, his gaze shifting back to me. "You've done your part," he said, his voice neutral. "We'll handle it from here." I nodded, my throat tight. "What about Eric?" "He's already in custody," Harris replied. "The evidence you provided was more than enough to warrant an arrest. Between the bank records, the emails, and the recordings, we've got a strong case against both of them." "Good," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Harris studied me for a moment, his expression softening slightly. "If you need anything, support, resources, don't hesitate to reach out. This kind of betrayal, it's not easy to move past." "Thanks," I said simply. The detective gave me a short nod before following his officers outside. Through the window, I watched as Jessica was placed in the back of the squad car, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked at the house one last time, her gaze desperate, pleading. But I didn't look away. When the cars finally pulled out of the driveway, silence fell over the house. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the spot where Jessica had been just moments ago. The weight of it all hit me like a tidal wave. The lies, the manipulation, the crash that nearly killed me. It was over, but it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, the adrenaline draining from my body and leaving only exhaustion behind. For so long, I'd been fighting just to survive, to uncover the truth. Now that I wasn't sure what came next. Later that night, Brandon called. "Well?" he asked. "They arrested her," I said. "And Eric." "Good," Brandon said, his voice firm. "You deserve this win, Liam. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It doesn't feel like a win." "It will," he said. "Give it time. You're free now. No more lies, no more games." "Yeah," I muttered. "Free." I hung up the phone and sat in the dark, the house eerily quiet. For the first time in years, there was no Jessica, no tension, no looming sense of betrayal. Just me. As the reality of it all settled in, I felt the faintest flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for certain. This was the end of Jessica's story in my life. and the beginning of mine.